At first, the rest of the galaxy didn't take humans seriously. We were the last ones to be invited to the United Coalition of Civilized Species, and even that was more of a formality. Nobody actually thought we'd bring anything to the table. Not when we were still solving disputes with guns and blowing each other up over flags and beliefs. They laughed at our emotions, called us unstable. Overly reactive, the Drylith said. Biologically primitive, sniffed the Urun. Driven by pride and anger, added the Korthari, a race of tall, lizard-like beings who had supposedly evolved past violence. But if there's one thing no species truly understood, it was that when a human gets annoyed, and I mean really annoyed, something deep and dangerous wakes up inside. I remember the moment everything changed. It was on Varad Prime, during peace talks between 6 species. A minor trade dispute had escalated into a full-scale blockade, and as usual, they called in a human diplomat as a neutral presence. That's where Lieutenant Commander Mason came in. Now, Mason wasn't your average suit-and-tie ambassador. He was ex-Special Forces, Earthborn, raised in a rough mining colony on Mars. He didn't smile much. Didn't talk unless he had to. But when he did, people listened. For the first few hours, things were civil. Accusations flew, fingers pointed, translators clicked, but Mason kept calm. He sipped his synth coffee, made notes, waited for his turn. Then the Drylith started blaming Earth for destabilizing trade in the outer sectors. Something about human interference through unregulated aggression. And Mason just blinked. You ever see someone breathe through their nose a little slower, shoulders tense slightly? That's when I knew he was getting there. The edge. He raised his hand. With all due respect, he said slowly, Earth hasn't touched your territory in 4 cycles. The Drylith delegate clicked its mandibles and sneered. Exactly, and still chaos follows you. Your species spreads emotional contagion like a virus. That was it. Mason leaned back in his chair. He sighed, long and low. The room went dead silent. His voice dropped into something colder, quieter. You know, he said, I've been patient. I've been polite. I've let you insult my home, my people, and my job. But now, he set down his cup gently, stood up, and looked around the table. Now I'm really getting annoyed. I've never seen fear like that, not even in combat. The Drylith twitched. The Urun's antennae folded backward. One of the Korthari guards instinctively put a hand on his weapon, then realized what he was doing and stopped, eyes wide. Because by then, every species had already learned what that phrase meant. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a warning, it was a countdown. You see, when humans say they're getting annoyed, it means they've already calculated the damage they're about to cause. They've weighed the consequences. They've given everyone a chance to walk away, and now they're done being nice. Mason didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He just stared, eyes like sharpened steel. And the silence was louder than any explosion. Within 10 minutes, every species had agreed to terms. Not perfect ones, not even favorable, but peaceful. And Mason? He just picked up his coffee again like nothing happened. Later, when I asked him how he managed to keep his cool under pressure, he shrugged. I wasn't keeping cool, he said. I was giving them a chance. That's when I understood. Humans aren't scary because they're violent. They're scary because they hold back so much. Because when they finally let go, when the mask slips, the galaxy burns. And that's why now every species knows. If a human ever looks at you and says, "Now I'm really getting annoyed," run. Most species assumed humans were dangerous because of their history, world wars, nuclear bombs, biological weapons, and the fact that we once tried to colonize our own moon with barely any preparation. But that wasn't it. What made humans truly terrifying wasn't what they'd done. It was how far they were willing to go when pushed. Before Mason ever stood in front of the United Coalition, he was just another human soldier stationed on Lorak 7, a fringe mining colony under Korthari supervision. The planet wasn't much. Harsh winds, acidic rains, and long nights. But it had ore the Korthari wanted, and workers they didn't care about. That's where the trouble started. The Korthari claimed they had evolved past violence, but what they meant was they outsourced it. They ran labor camps with smiling bureaucrats and polite guards who beat workers behind sealed doors. And humans? Well, they didn't last long there. But Mason did. He'd signed up for the Peacekeeper Exchange Program, a symbolic attempt by the Coalition to promote integration. Most human peacekeepers stayed close to Earth, where the rules were simple. Mason didn't. He volunteered for the Outer Rim. At the time, nobody questioned it. He was quiet, professional, always did his job, always followed orders, until one day, he didn't. The reports were scrubbed later, redacted, buried under diplomatic immunity and classified archives. But people talked, survivors remembered, and so did the Korthari. It started when a human miner, 17 years old, was beaten to death for stealing rations. Not tried, not sentenced, just dragged into a supply room and left as an example. When Mason found out, he filed the paperwork. He demanded an investigation. He quoted coalition law. But nothing happened. The Korthari called it local disciplinary action. The file disappeared. So Mason asked again, politely, then formally, then firmly. Still nothing. Witnesses say he stood in the mess hall the next evening, surrounded by workers and guards alike. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I've asked nicely," he said. "I've been patient." Then he looked directly at the Korthari supervisor, a thin, scaled thing with black robes and a permanent smirk. "But now I'm really getting annoyed." The supervisor laughed. Literally laughed. And that was the last time anyone on Lorak 7 ever saw him alive. What happened next became legend. Mason didn't start a war. He didn't raise a rebellion. He walked into the security station alone, disabled the communications array, locked the building down, and calmly took the guard captain hostage. No one knows exactly how. There's no footage left. But within 15 minutes, every Korthari security team on the colony had surrendered or fled. They say he didn't even raise his voice. By the time coalition reinforcements arrived, the humans had taken control of the colony. Not in chaos, in order. Mason had organized supply lines, set up a chain of command, and secured the mining facilities. Not a single worker was harmed, but 8 Korthari officers were confirmed dead. Dozens more were never found. The coalition called it a contained incident. The media labeled it a response to labor violations. But the Korthari? They called it something else. The Day of the Human Flame. From that moment on, something shifted. The galaxy, for all its advanced technology and interstellar law, had never dealt with a species like humans before. Empaths like the Varnal would cry their pain. The logic-bound Tellarans negotiated endlessly. The cold and calculating Olorin would let enemies starve instead of attacking. But humans could smile while bleeding, laugh while angry, hold back for months, then snap with surgical precision, not out of rage, not out of madness, but out of something far worse, conviction. That's why the phrase became feared. Now I'm really getting annoyed. It meant the human had reached the point of no return, not emotionally, but morally. They'd decided. And when a human decides something is wrong, they'll tear apart heaven and hell to fix it. But Mason wasn't the only example. Captain Elira Tran of the Valhalla's Grin was another name whispered in alien war rooms. Her crew of 60 humans held off a Kordek fleet of 200 ships for 32 hours, with only one fuel cell and half their weapons online. She warned them, gave them time, tried diplomacy. Then, as she calmly broadcast to all frequencies, "I'm trying very hard to stay calm, but if you keep pushing, I swear I'm going to get annoyed." They didn't listen. She rammed their flagship with a half-damaged corvette, destroyed their command structure, and triggered a chain reaction that disabled 73 vessels in one blast. The rest fled. Not because they were outgunned, but because they realized something terrible. She meant it. The galaxy slowly began to adapt, not just in war, but in politics, in business, in culture. Peace delegations began reviewing human body language classes. Alien governments hired human irritation analysts to monitor diplomatic meetings. Entire books were written about how to de-escalate a mildly upset human before they become a problem. Because unlike other species who screamed when they were angry or lashed out in fear, humans got quiet, still, focused, and then they acted. Of course, not all humans were like Mason or Tran. Most were just workers, explorers, scientists. But that didn't matter. The galaxy had already learned the lesson. You never knew which human in the room could flip the switch. That's why, during a routine security audit on the trade station Chiron 5, when a human technician named Malik Reyes whispered to himself, "Now I'm getting really annoyed," 3 Drylith engineers hit the panic button and evacuated the bay. They didn't even know what the issue was. They just ran. Later, Reyes said he was trying to fix a jammed power conduit and muttered it out of habit, but the phrase had already become a trigger, a ghost story, a warning passed down through generations. Because that's how humans fought, not just with weapons, but with presence, with pressure, with a kind of storm that started small, with a sigh, a pause, a sentence, and ended in silence. Galactic Command once ran a psychological study titled Threshold Response in Human Conflict Resolution. Their conclusion was chilling. The phrase, "Now I'm really getting annoyed," consistently marks a shift in human behavior from restraint to strategic aggression. The response is neither random nor explosive. It is deliberate, goal-driven, and typically unstoppable unless met with complete submission or removal of the source of irritation. Translated, if you heard it, you'd already lost. And still, most aliens don't believe it, until it's too late. Back in Coalition headquarters, Mason was promoted, quietly. Not to a flashy position. Not to one with press conferences and awards. But to something behind the curtain. Strategic Response Division. The place they send humans when diplomacy fails and war is too obvious. They don't give those people medals. They give them latitude. The last time I saw Mason was on a shuttle platform orbiting Torvin 9. A minor rebellion had broken out. Some mercenary force backed by rogue Veyri investors. The Coalition wanted to stabilize without drawing attention. So, naturally, they sent him. I asked him why he still did it, after everything. He looked at me, tired eyes behind a battered helmet. "Because someone's got to clean up after the grown-ups," he said. "And sometimes all it takes is someone willing to be annoyed enough to do something about it." He smiled, small and crooked. "Besides," he added, "they always run before it gets messy." I watched his shuttle disappear into the clouds, and I wondered how many more times the galaxy would ignore the signs. The quiet sigh, the clenched jaw, the sentence. "Now I'm really getting annoyed." By then, it's not a warning. It's an obituary. The planet Kelvaris 3 was a political nightmare, wrapped in red tape and wrapped again in explosive tension. Officially, it was a shared resource zone between the Drylith and the Korthari. Unofficially, it was a ticking warhead with centuries of bad blood, and both sides had been waiting for an excuse to start shooting again. It wasn't just about the minerals, though Kelveris had rare silicates essential for faster-than-light cores. It was about ego, history, old scars. 3 separate wars had been fought over it, all ending in ceasefires that satisfied nobody. And now, after a drylith mining rig accidentally drilled across the boundary line, the Korthari had surrounded the ridge with plasma tanks and started calling it a breach of sovereignty. The coalition sent 3 teams of negotiators. All failed. That's when they sent him. Commander Mason arrived on a civilian freighter. No escorts, no flags, no media. Just a dusty duffel bag, and a face nobody ever seemed to forget. The drylith greeted him with suspicion. The Korthari with thinly veiled hostility. Both sides thought the same thing. Just another human diplomat here to buy time. But Mason didn't do time. He took it. The central hub was a neutral facility. Steel floors, recycled air, cameras in every corner. It looked peaceful. But underneath, the planet was vibrating with tension. Satellite scans showed the Korthari had armed their artillery drones. The drylith had cloaked 6 destroyers just outside orbit. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. War was 1 word away. Mason didn't start with speeches, didn't gather everyone around a conference table. He walked the perimeter of the facility, alone. No aides, no weapon, just watching. Some of the drylith soldiers muttered under their breath in their clicking tongue. He's wasting time. He looks tired. Fragile. Is this the same one from Lorak? He didn't react, but they noticed something strange. His pace, the way he didn't blink as much, the way his jaw tensed just slightly when they laughed. He wasn't talking. He was measuring. By day 2, both sides were requesting formal negotiation sessions. Mason declined. Instead, he requested an inspection of the drylith rig and Korthari perimeter weapons. The drylith delegate, a spindly insectoid named Vrelzuk, scoffed. What exactly do you think you'll find, human? We are well within the energy treaty protocols. Mason looked at him for a long time. Just looked. Then said softly, I'll let you know when I'm done being polite. Vrelzuk flinched. The Korthari general, a thick-scaled brute named Loranak, tried intimidation instead. You come here without rank, without armor, and without backup. You think your name is enough to make us back down? Mason stood inches away from him, eyes level, hands behind his back. I think, he said slowly. You're hoping I don't get annoyed. The general blinked first. By the end of that day, the drylith had quietly powered down their forward drills, and the Korthari had begun repositioning tanks away from the rig. No commands were given, no treaties signed, but something was shifting. That night, the coalition observers recorded an odd report. The air inside the facility dropped by nearly 2 degrees. Multiple species requested thermal padding. One even asked if the heating systems were failing. They weren't. It was just Mason. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a threat. But the temperature dropped anyway. By day 5, the coalition received a strange message from General Loranak himself. We are requesting immediate resolution before the human escalates. The tension is unbearable. That's how it always started. See, humans like Mason don't attack with guns. They attack with presence, with time, with pressure. The room gets smaller. The air gets tighter. People start second-guessing every word they say, wondering if they just triggered the countdown. And then it happens. On the 6th day, a drylith guard, a young, nervous type, bumped into Mason in the hallway. A harmless mistake, but instead of apologizing, the drylith hissed, Maybe you're not as scary as the stories say. Mason stopped, turned to him, and smiled. I've been very patient with your species, he said quietly. But now Now I'm really getting annoyed. The guard stumbled back. His mandibles clicked uncontrollably. He wasn't even sure why. Mason didn't move forward, didn't raise his voice, but the phrase hit like thunder. Within 2 hours, the Drylith retracted their claim to the disputed ridge. 4 hours later, the Kurthari withdrew their heavy weapons from the planet's surface. By the next day, a new agreement was signed. Not perfect, but peaceful. Mason didn't attend the ceremony. He was already boarding a transport to the next fire waiting to be put out. I was in the command deck when the Coalition observers debriefed the Drylith and Kurthari officials. One of them, a young analyst from the Nalari system, asked, "What exactly made you change your stance? We've had dozens of failed attempts before this." Vrelzuk, still pale in his exoskeleton, didn't hesitate. He said the words. The analyst blinked. "The words," Loranak grunted. "You know the words." And just like that, silence. Nobody said it. But everyone heard it. Because when a human like Mason says that line, it isn't dramatic. It isn't rhetorical. It's the start of something old, something primal. A psychological shift, not just in the human, but in everyone else. And here's the part most species still don't get. Humans don't want to be angry. They hate being angry. It's exhausting. It's inefficient. It costs relationships and trust and control. So when they say they're getting annoyed, it's not a threat. It's a warning to themselves. It's them putting a lid on the boiling water one last time. And once that lid comes off, you don't want to be standing nearby. Back on his ship, Mason didn't celebrate. He didn't even act like he won anything. He sat at a table, writing notes, reviewing transcripts, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I asked him, "How did you know they'd fold?" He didn't look up, just muttered, "They always do." I waited a moment. "Because of your reputation?" He finally looked up, eyes shadowed by fatigue. "No," he said, "because I gave them a chance not to. And deep down, they know what happens if they don't take it." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered the words like they were a prayer and a curse at once. "Now I'm really getting annoyed." Before the legend, before the phrase became a warning, before the galaxy ever learned to flinch at a calm human voice, there was a boy named Dane Mason, just another grunt in a war nobody remembers anymore. It was Earth's last colonial war. Not against aliens, not against some interstellar empire, but against ourselves. One last bitter conflict between Earthborn governance and the Outer Rim colonies that wanted independence. The place was called Meraxist II, a barely livable rock orbiting a dying red star. It was there, buried in ash and iron and half-broken satellites, that Dane Mason learned how dangerous restraint could become. The war was personal. The Earth government had installed automated taxes on the colonies, bleeding them dry. When protests didn't work, they tried sabotage. The response? Orbital strikes, food embargoes, and what they called precision isolation. Thousands died in silence. And so the colonies raised their own militia, poorly trained, barely armed, but furious. Young Mason joined at 19, not for politics, not for rebellion. He joined because the blockade cut off medicine shipments, and his sister died screaming for painkillers that never arrived. That kind of grief doesn't scream. It sinks. It simmers. It turns into long nights of staring at the ceiling, imagining what you could have done if you'd just acted sooner. His unit, Redline Squad, was assigned to Operation Sundown, a foolish push into Earth-controlled airspace, hoping to cut through to the supply tunnels. They had maybe 80 troops. Earth had drones, satellites, and a hardened bunker dug into the planet's throat. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. But Mason didn't flinch. He didn't speak much either. While other soldiers cried, joked, or prayed before deployment, he just checked his gear in silence. His squad leader, a loud-mouthed ex-Marine named Jax, once asked him, "What makes you so calm, rookie? You think you're untouchable?" Mason looked at him, eyes flat. "I'm not calm," he said. "I'm just not loud about what I'm carrying." At 400 hours, Redline Squad launched their assault. It was supposed to be a fast breach and secure. In and out in 30 minutes. It lasted 3 days. They were ambushed 2 kilometers from the bunker. Drones sliced the skies with railgun rounds. 2 hover tanks peeled out from underground hangars. The comms went dark almost instantly. Half the squad was vaporized in the first 10 minutes. Mason survived. Not because he was lucky, not because he was better, but because he waited. While the others tried to scatter or return fire in blind panic, Mason crawled under a wrecked mech and didn't move for 6 hours. He watched, studied, waited. When the Earth troops moved to retrieve dog tags from the fallen, he struck. 1 clean shot, 1 rifle stolen, 1 uniform swapped. He walked right into their bunker wearing the armor of a dead man named Ensign Teller. His heartbeat never spiked. Over the next 18 hours, Mason navigated through the enemy base, silently disabling security nodes, overloading fuse lines, and memorizing patrol schedules. He never fired a shot unless it was to save someone, and even then, he aimed for the knees, not the head, because he didn't want to kill the enemy. He wanted them to feel it, the fear, the silence, the presence. By the time Redline Squad's 2 remaining survivors regrouped, they found the enemy's defense grid down and the front gate open. Mason was standing in the hallway, soaked in oil and blood, holding a detonator. Jax, coughing and limping, looked at him in awe. You did all this?" Mason's voice was cold. "They locked the med lockers," he said. "So I opened the gates." "What about the command staff?" "They're in the cryo room. I told them not to move." "Did they listen?" Mason stared at the blinking light on the detonator. "They will." He set the charges behind them, and they walked away as the walls caved in. The Earth forces retreated from Miraxis II within the week, not because of strategic loss, not because of military pressure, but because someone had breached their unbreachable line with patience, calculation, and a level of focus that wasn't human by their standards. The brass called Mason in for questioning. "How did you get past our sensors?" "I walked." "You disabled 8 sentry nodes alone?" "I had time." "Why didn't you kill the officers?" "They weren't worth the bullet." They didn't know whether to court-martial him or promote him. Eventually, they did neither. They offered him a choice. Go home or go off record. Mason chose the shadows. That's when he became a ghost. The name they used when they needed a crisis diffused, a war stopped before it began, or a room full of liars to tell the truth. But no matter how many missions he took, how many conflicts he ended, he never forgot Miraxis. The blood on the floor, the ration crate marked with his sister's name. The feeling of holding all that rage inside and letting it sharpen instead of explode. That's what made Mason different. Some soldiers are fire. They burn, consume, scream. Mason was the knife in cold water. He waited until it was time to cut. And the galaxy wasn't ready for that. Most species weren't built to hold anger the way humans do. Korthari flared their tempers in seconds. The Drylith clicked and screeched when disrespected. The Vayari shut down emotionally when insulted. But humans could take insult after insult, injustice after injustice, and still function, still nod, still smile, until one moment, one line changed everything. And they'd say it, with no ceremony, no warning. "Now I'm really getting annoyed." That phrase wasn't born in some diplomat's mouth. It was forged in Meraxis, in the silence between gunshots, in the wait between heartbreak and retaliation. It wasn't a tactic, it was a truth. And Mason, he became the embodiment of that truth. Years later, during a classified debriefing in the Outer Systems, a young Coalition officer nervously asked Mason, "How do you stay so calm when everyone's watching you like you're a monster?" Mason didn't answer right away. He just tapped the old, worn dog tag he wore around his neck, the one that didn't belong to him. Then he said, "Because I remember what happens when I stop." The room went still. No one asked another question. The station was called Eros Pearl, a floating pleasure palace orbiting the gas giant Balos Kos. Built by the wealthy Korthari elite, it was marketed as a conflict-free zone for business, diplomacy, and vice. Glass domes, golden halls, 100 species mingling with cocktails and credit sticks. But on day 74 of the Interstellar Trade Summit, it became a prison. No one saw the strike coming, not even the security AI. A very separatist cell, Whispers of Flame, managed to hack through the station's internal command system, seal the doors, and hold every delegate hostage. Over 300 beings from 24 different planets, trapped inside, rigged with explosives, and surrounded by force fields. The demands were insane. Full independence for Veari moons, unconditional withdrawal of coalition ships, reversal of every trade embargo in place. And if they weren't met within 3 days, they'd blow the entire station into gas and glass. The coalition called it a delicate diplomatic emergency. They sent negotiation teams, probes, drones, Psi operatives trained in de-escalation. The separatists refused to speak to anyone. So the coalition sent him. Commander Dane Mason. He arrived on a cargo vessel, unarmed, carrying only a single duffel bag and a plain black coat with no rank insignia. When asked for identification by the outer docking security, he simply said, "They're expecting me." He wasn't wrong. Inside the control room, the lead separatist, a tall, pale Veari named Sirendal, froze when she saw the human's name come through the station logs. "Dane Mason?" she said, her voice cracking. Another member of her squad looked confused. "Who?" She swallowed, mandibles twitching. "The man the coalition sends when they want silence." By the time Mason stepped into the observation deck, every screen was watching him. They expected threats, orders, heroic speeches. Instead, Mason did something far more terrifying. He sat down. In a small chair by the window, facing the force field, a thermal flask in hand. He didn't speak. He didn't look at the cameras. He just waited for 10 hours, then 20. No communication, no movement, just stillness. The separatists grew nervous. Sirendal sent taunting messages. "We will not be moved by your tactics. We are prepared to die." No reply. One of the younger rebels, shaky hands on his blaster, muttered, "He's not even doing anything. What's his plan?" "He is doing something," Siren snapped. "He's waiting. That's what he does." The thing about humans, especially Mason, is they know the value of time. He once waited 3 full days in a trench on a frost-bitten moon, in sub-zero temperatures, for a political assassin to reveal himself. He didn't blink, didn't complain, just waited. And now, the same presence settled into the station like a slow-burning fuse. Security staff watching from outside started reporting odd readings. Heart rates inside the hostage chamber were rising. Cortisol levels spiked. Oxygen intake increased. Not from the rebels, from the hostages, because they recognized the name. And they started whispering it, like a myth brought to life. "Is that him? The man from the Kelvari standoff?" "No, the one from Meraxis. I thought he was just a ghost story." Fear didn't just spread among the hostage-takers. It began to boil from within the crowd. By the start of day 3, panic was setting in. The hostages, once terrified of their captors, had turned silent, eyes fixed on the man behind the glass, the one who still hadn't moved, still hadn't spoken. Sirin Dal, nerves frayed, activated the intercom. "You think you can scare us into surrender?" she shouted. "You think sitting there doing nothing will break us?" Mason didn't respond, didn't even blink. But 30 seconds later, he stood up. Every monitor across the station zoomed in on that single motion. The rebels froze. Sirin gritted her teeth. "Don't react. He's just trying to—" Then Mason stepped forward and tapped on the glass. Once, twice. Then he leaned in close and said only 5 words. Now I'm really getting annoyed. You could feel the temperature drop. Not literally. The climate system still functioned, but emotionally, the air turned to ice. A Drylith ambassador fainted on the spot. 2 of the rebels began arguing over whether they should detonate the chamber early, before Mason got inside. Sirin panicked. "Patch me through to Coalition Command. Now!" The rebels watched in disbelief as she tossed aside her ideology like a coat too heavy to carry. "We're ready to negotiate," she said, voice shaking. "Full release of the hostages. Partial withdrawal. We'll disarm. We'll just tell him to stop looking at us." Coalition Command replied, confused. "You mean Mason?" "Yes," she screamed. "Tell him we're done." On the deck, Mason watched the force field deactivate. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He walked in like a man heading home from work. One hostage, a young Martian boy, later told interviewers, "I wasn't scared of the terrorists anymore. I was scared they'd done something to make him mad." Mason secured the rebels. No shots fired. No resistance. They dropped their weapons the second he stepped through the door. And here's the strangest part. As he walked out, leading over 300 rescued hostages, he paused next to Sirin Dal, now cuffed and silent, head down. He looked at her, not with anger, but pity. "You never meant to die," he said. "You just wanted to be heard." She didn't reply. "I was giving you a chance to change your mind," Mason added. "But next time someone like me shows up—" He leaned closer. "Don't wait until he says he's annoyed." Then he walked away. The event was spun as a peaceful resolution. The Coalition praised it as a model of non-violent intervention, but every species in the sector updated their crisis protocols that week. Trigger phrase alert. Now I'm really getting annoyed. Red code level threat if uttered by a human in control of the situation. Immediate compliance advised. The galaxy didn't fear Mason because of what he might do. They feared him because they finally understood something far more horrifying. He didn't want to do it. But if he had to, he'd do it right, and you'd never see it coming. The story of Commander Dane Mason had spread across the galaxy like myth, like fire. Every species had their version of it. Some called him the Quiet Storm. Others called him the Last Patience. The Drylith referred to him only in hushed cliques as the Cold Human. But even myths bleed. Even legends break. There was one mission nobody liked to mention. One that didn't show up on his official records, yet was whispered through back channels like a warning. Operation Halberd. Nobody knew the full truth. The files were classified, the footage wiped, and most of the team either reassigned or gone. But I was there. I saw it. And what I saw wasn't the man who made generals tremble. It was the man who stopped being patient and never forgave himself for it. The target was a biogenetic facility on Eric's Prime, run by a rogue faction of the Urun, a cold, amphibious species known for their obsession with purity through evolution. For years, the Urun Collective had denied any connection to the facility, claiming it was radicalized rogue science, the kind they publicly condemned and privately funded. We received intel that they'd begun live experimentation on hybrids, cross-species children born of interplanetary unions, mostly poor or undocumented. Their DNA was being harvested, spliced, tested. Most didn't survive. When the Coalition command intercepted the last distress signal, a 10-second scream from a child's throat followed by static, they didn't send a fleet. They sent Mason. He didn't ask questions, didn't request a team, just said, "Where are they?" I was the comms tech assigned to relay drone footage and keep an eye on life sign trackers. I wasn't supposed to be near the action, just behind the screen. But nothing stayed behind the screen that day. Mason landed 12 clicks from the facility, alone, and hiked through acid fog and broken terrain for 6 hours. By the time he reached the outer wall, 2 recon drones had already gone silent. Most soldiers would have paused, called for backup. Mason didn't. He walked through the main entrance like it was a school hallway. The footage we managed to keep shows him moving silently through the corridors, disabling cameras with the tip of his knife, marking rooms with chalk symbols no one understood but him. Then he found the labs. I don't think he expected to see what he saw. I know I didn't. There were cages, stacked floor to ceiling. Children, human, half-human, Draelith, Telleran, locked inside. Some were barely breathing. Others didn't move at all. No alarms triggered. No guards rushed in. The Urun didn't need to protect the facility, because they didn't believe anyone was crazy enough to come after them. Mason opened the cages one by one. He spoke gently, helped the surviving children out, whispering instructions, giving them energy packs from his own pack. And then he found room 47B. No footage exists from inside that room. We only have audio. 12 seconds of it. A sharp inhale. A sound like a fist punching meat. And then Mason's voice, "Oh no, you shouldn't have done that." The comm line cut. By the time our signal re-established, the facility was different. There was fire, on a planet where fire doesn't naturally exist, where everything is damp, bioreactive, and sealed. Yet the hallway was burning. Guards lay unconscious or twitching in shock. A control console was embedded halfway into a wall. Mason's armor read full damage, but he was still walking. He didn't speak for nearly an hour. Not until he reached the command center, where the chief scientist, a tall Urun named Salith Vorn, stood behind a reinforced shield. "Who are you?" the Urun spat. "Do you have any idea what we're doing here? This is science. This is progress. These things are—" Mason cut him off. "I've been patient," he said. Vorn scoffed. "You think one angry human changes the course of evolution?" "No," Mason said, walking up to the shield, placing a hand gently on the reinforced glass. "But I'm not angry." His eyes met the Urun's. "I'm beyond that now." Then he said the words, the ones we all feared. "Now I'm really getting annoyed." And with that, he pulled a device from his jacket, something we never gave him, something unregistered. It pulsed once, the lights in the facility flickered, and the shield cracked. It cracked. We didn't know how. No human tech should have been able to breach that shield. But Mason had found a way. The last thing we saw on the monitor before it went black was Vorn screaming as the glass exploded inward. When the Coalition task force arrived 20 minutes later, the facility was smoking. Half collapsed and empty. Mason sat outside in the rain, armor scorched, holding 3 unconscious children wrapped in thermal cloth. He didn't speak. He didn't stand when they landed. He just stared into the distance, whispering something to himself we couldn't hear. He was pulled from field duty after that. No court-martial, no medals, just silence. The Coalition tried to spin it, Heroic rescue mission. Rogue lab destroyed. Trafficking ring neutralized. But those who saw the raw data knew better. We knew Mason didn't just go in to stop them. He went in to make a point. And when he said he was annoyed, he meant you crossed a line no one comes back from. He disappeared for a while after that. Rumors said he was reassigned to Black Ops psychological warfare. Others claimed he left the coalition altogether. Some said he was put into stasis, like a weapon only opened when the locks failed. But me? I think something died in that lab on Eric's Prime. Not the man. Not even his patience. But the last piece of his belief that things could be fixed without breaking. And that's why, when people mention Operation Halberd, they don't talk about strategy. They don't talk about victory. They talk about what happens when you leave no choice for a man who gave you every chance. Because anger is easy, but cold fury? That's what makes even the gods flinch. You'd think after all the wars he stopped, all the crises he ended, all the lives he saved, they'd give Mason a monument. But heroes don't get statues. They get trials. The Galactic Tribunal of Ethical Warfare convened in orbit above neutral ground, a custom-built station in the Ornis cluster, surrounded by 10,000 kilometers of nothing. No civilians, no diplomats, just the Tribunal Council, the military observers, and the cameras broadcasting to every species with a satellite signal. His charge? Unlawful use of psychological warfare, violation of species dignity protocols, unauthorized deployment of lethal force. They used a lot of words to say what they really meant. Mason scared them, and scared things don't stay silent for long. The courtroom was a hexagonal chamber built in concentric levels, judges at the top, witnesses in the middle, the accused standing alone at the center, under the scrutiny of lights that never dimmed. Mason wore no uniform, no medals, no flag, just a dark gray shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and an expression that hadn't changed in 20 years. Calm, unreadable, patient. The lead judge, a silver-skinned Telleran named Yelzor, began the proceedings. Commander Dane Mason, you stand before this tribunal to answer for your repeated violations of interspecies conduct. Do you understand the charges? Mason nodded once. The Drylith representative, Vrel Zook, the same delegate from the Kelvaris incident, leaned forward with a hint of bitterness. He should be detained permanently. His presence destabilizes diplomacy. The Korthari ambassador growled. He operates outside protocol. He is a blunt instrument in a fragile galaxy. The Urun observer, stiff and silent, simply handed over a data chip marked Eric's Prime. No one said it out loud, but they all shared the same hope. Break the myth, clip the human's wings, prove that even the scariest man in the galaxy could be tamed. Mason listened quietly as they built their case. They listed everything. Miraxis 2, psychological manipulation of enemy forces via intimidation and infiltration. Kelvaris 3, disruption of established protocol, use of fear to force political concession. Eros Pearl, intentional silent pressure to create a panic state among hostiles and civilians alike. Operation Halberd, the unspoken violation, the shadow no one wanted to say out loud but everyone remembered. They brought in witnesses, experts, even former allies. One diplomat said, "He doesn't solve problems, he corners people until they crack." Another analyst chimed in, "We've studied him. His methods are too controlled, too calm. That's what makes him dangerous." But none of them could say he ever broke a treaty. Not one, not once. So finally, after 4 days of accusations, statistics, and political theater, they gave him the floor, and that's when things started to change. Mason stepped forward, slow and quiet. No flash, no righteous anger, just words. Soft, steady, surgical. "You talk about control," he said, eyes sweeping the chamber. "About fear, about what I've become." He paused. I didn't become this. You made me this. The room shifted. Not physically, emotionally. I've been sent into riots with no translator. I've been dropped into war zones with no backup. I've been told to handle it when the rest of you refused to show up. You want to put me on trial for scaring tyrants? He asked. For making slavers sweat? For making corrupt regimes reconsider their next move? A few delegates looked away. Do you know what I've said every time I gave someone a chance to walk away? Silence. Mason stepped closer to the central console. I told them I was trying to stay calm, that I was being patient, that I wanted peace. He leaned into the mic, voice lowering, and I told them when they kept pushing. He let the words hang like a thundercloud. That I was getting annoyed. The Drylith delegate shifted in his seat. Mason straightened. You think that phrase is a threat? It's not. It's the final mercy. The moment where I'm still asking you, begging you to back off, to think, to stop making me do what comes next. He looked up at the judges. I've never wanted war. I wanted to stop it. I wanted to protect people who didn't have someone like me standing beside them. He tapped the side of his head. But I learned the galaxy doesn't fear explosions. It doesn't fear guns. It fears decisions. And when a human decides to stop being polite, to stop asking nicely, that's when people start listening. The room was dead quiet. Somewhere in the back, a Telleran scribe's hands trembled. Mason spoke again, this time softer. There's one thing you still don't understand about humans, something you never will. He walked back to the center, gaze heavy as gravity. You think we're dangerous when we're angry? A long pause. We're not. He looked them all dead in the eye. We're dangerous when we've been angry, and we're finally done hiding it. The judges recessed for private deliberation. The broadcast cut to silence. News anchors tried to spin it, pundits speculated, but none of them could shake the feeling that Mason hadn't defended himself. He'd warned them. 3 hours later, the tribunal reconvened. Judge Yelsor cleared her throat. Commander Dane Mason, this council finds you in violation of tactical conduct, but absolved of criminal intent. The room shifted, some relieved, others stunned. You are hereby dismissed from active coalition deployment, indefinitely. They expected him to fight it. He didn't. He simply nodded. No smile, no words. Just the sound of a chair pushed gently against the floor. As Mason walked out, a young security officer followed behind him, struggling to keep up. Sir, Commander, sorry, Mr. Mason, now, I guess, if you don't mind me asking, what happens now? Mason didn't stop walking. I rest. The officer blinked. Rest? After all this? Mason looked over his shoulder, expression unreadable. I've spent 20 years being patient for other people. He stepped into the transport pod. Now it's time to be patient for myself. That should have been the end of it. But you can't bury a storm with paper. You can't cage a legend with laws. And somewhere out there, deep in the black of space, systems are burning again. Greed rises. Oppression spreads. And across every comm channel, in every underground command post, there's one phrase no one wants to hear echo through the static. Now I'm really getting annoyed. Because when a man like Mason says it, even once, entire planets change course. After the tribunal, Dane Mason vanished. No one knew where he went. Some said he retired to a moon colony. Others said he boarded a deep space freighter and never looked back. There were even rumors he entered cryostasis under a false name, locked away like a loaded weapon waiting for the right war. But the truth was simpler. He just got tired. 20 years of holding back, of carrying the weight of restraint like armor, had worn him down. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of what he'd become if he stopped caring. So Mason disappeared, and the galaxy tried to move on. It shouldn't have. 2 years later, it happened. The Scourge. A silent, crawling extinction event. Not a fleet, not an army, but a biomechanical intelligence that consumed star systems like a virus. No one knew where it came from. It wasn't driven by war or politics. It didn't broadcast demands or warnings. It just devoured. First the Tyvan cluster, then Serox Delta, then half of Zanari space in 6 weeks. 50 billion lives gone. Species that had hated each other for centuries suddenly begged for an alliance. Coalitions formed overnight. Flags were burned, egos abandoned. But nothing stopped it. Not kinetic weapons. Not plasma warheads. Not quantum disruptions. The Scourge adapted, learned, unfolded. And soon, one terrifying truth emerged. This enemy wasn't afraid of anyone. Not until someone whispered a name. It started in the background chatter, low-level comms, pirate channels, black site forums. A Korthari captain said, "You know who we need." A Viari refugee whispered, "I'd rather hear him say it than die like this." A Drylith war queen broadcast a message on all frequencies. "Bring us the human who scares the dark." The coalition debated. They had exiled him, stripped him of rank, denounced his methods, but when the Scourge reached the Cradle Worlds, and its tendrils brushed the edge of Earth's sun, they all knew. It wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about survival. And so, after much silence and shame, they activated Protocol Obsidian, the last resort beacon tied to only one man. They sent it, and waited. 3 days passed, then 4. No reply. Until a signal blinked into existence from the Kuiper expanse, a region so dead no one even charted it anymore. The voice was unmistakable. "This Mason, I got your message." Pause. "I assume things have gotten annoying?" The message ended there. No demands, no questions, just those words. And for the first time in months, the galaxy dared to hope. They met him on the Vigilant Horizon, a carrier orbiting the last defensible system before the Scourge would reach the galactic core. The moment he stepped onto the deck, everything stopped. The Drylith bowed. The Korthari saluted. Even the emotionless Tayloran envoys took a step back. Mason hadn't changed much, just a few more lines on his face. But his eyes, those were colder now. Not dead, just settled. Like the storm had finally accepted its purpose. Admiral Lennox of the Coalition approached him, unsure of how to even start. "Mason, I know you—" Mason raised a hand. "Save it. Where's the data?" They handed it over. He read everything: Scourge origin, attack patterns, attempted countermeasures, then closed the file. "This isn't a war," he said. "It's an infection." "You think it can be stopped?" Lennox asked. Mason looked out the viewport, where distant stars were blinking out like candles. "Not with weapons." "Then how?" Mason turned to him, calm as ever. "I'm going to annoy it." The Scourge operated like a hive, interconnected, reactive, fast. But one thing stood out. It ignored anything it didn't perceive as a threat. It consumed, it grew, but it didn't fear. Mason planned to change that. He led a crew of 6, volunteers, misfits, outcasts, aboard an experimental stealth vessel with no weapons, no flags, and no return ticket. Their mission? Pierce the heart of the Scourge cluster. Not to attack, to introduce something it had never encountered: human refusal. The moment they breached the anomaly zone, the Scourge detected them. Ships, if you could call them that, unfolded from nothing. Tendrils of black metal and shrieking data reached for them, like hands dipped in nightmares. Mason stood in front of the main console, arms folded. "Don't fire," he said. "They'll rip us apart," the pilot shouted. "Not if they're confused." Confused? The Scourge had no concept of patience. No concept of hesitation. So Mason gave it exactly that. He activated a feedback loop, human emotional data fed into its sensors, grief, love, loss, forgiveness, not as weapons, but as questions. He made it think, and then he spoke. "Now I'm really getting annoyed." He whispered it into the ship's speakers, which bounced it through the quantum relay into the Scourge's neural net, where it heard not a threat, not a command, but a promise. The Scourge recoiled. For the first time, its formations broke. It hesitated. Mason moved fast. The team uploaded the virus, a linguistic paradox built on human emotional contradiction, mercy from rage, peace through resistance. The Scourge didn't understand. It screamed. Stars around them blinked into white fire. But it was already too late. The human signal had reached the core. The Scourge finally felt something. And what it felt was a presence that didn't rage, didn't beg, didn't shout. It waited. Waited like a human who had spent their whole life being patient, and who had now, finally, decided to act. When the Scourge receded, it didn't shatter, it didn't die, it just left, back into the void it came from. No one knew why, except those who heard the last message Mason sent before the line went dead. "You've met fury, you've met fire, but now you've met someone who waited long enough. Don't come back. I won't ask nicely again." The vigilant horizon tried to reach them. No response. Mason's ship was gone. Some say he was destroyed with it. Others believe he went into the Scourge, to chase it, contain it, or become something worse. But no system has fallen since. The stars are still burning. And across the galaxy, in classrooms, in war rooms, in whispered bars, the name Dane Mason has become more than legend. It's become a reminder that humans are not feared for their anger. They are feared because they wait. And when they stop waiting, you better not be the reason. Because when a human says, "Now I'm really getting annoyed," it's already too late.